Effie, and this is What Effie Reads. So a few days ago, the 2021 Goodreads Choice Awards were announced. And it's something that I've wanted to do for a while, is to read or try to read all of the books in one category for the Goodreads Choice Awards, so that I can make I can actually make a decision based on the books, having actually read the books in the category. The turnaround is so tight that I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it, because I am a slow reader. I'm lucky if I hit 200 words per minute. But also I do listen to audiobooks on 2 times speed, so I get through audiobooks relatively quickly. But if I'm physically reading a book, it does take me a while. There's roughly 2 weeks from the 20 nominees being announced until it's narrowed down to 10 nominees, and then there's a further 1 week between it being narrowed down from 10 to voting closing. So in theory, I want to try and read all 20 books in the 2 weeks. Am I going to do it? Highly unlikely. Am I going to try my hardest? You bet. And as was probably in the title of this video, I'm going to be doing the debut novel category. I picked this category because I feel like this is one where it really could go anyway, in my opinion anyway, because debut authors don't necessarily have that ardent fan base that make it really clear that the vote will go their way. I feel like I read quite broadly. I do read non-fiction, probably not as much as I would like, but I do read non-fiction. I have discovered pretty much this year that I do enjoy literary fiction, which is something I didn't realise I enjoyed. I like fantasy, I like sci-fi, I like thrillers. The only category that I don't really like is contemporary romance, but even then, I do enjoy smart. And it's difficult as well, because it's I liked Red, White and Royal Blue, and that is technically a contemporary romance. I think it needs to push the boundaries of believability for me. So the 20 books that have been long listed for this category are as follows: The Final Revival of Opal Nev by Dawnie Walton, The Spanish Love Deception by Eleanor Armas, We Are the Brennans by Tracy Lang, The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner, The Sweetness of Water by Nathan Harris, Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell, Of Women and Salt by Gabriela Garcia, She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan, The Push by Ashley Audrain, Black Book by Matteo Asticapour, Detransition Baby by Tori Peters, Open Water by Caleb Azuma Nelson, Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Booley, The Five Runes by Kristen Valdez Quaid, The Gilded Ones by Namina Fauna, The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr., All Her Little Secrets by Wanda M. Morris, The Paper Palace by Miranda Cowley Heller, The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois by Honoré Fanon Jeffers, Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. I'm just sitting in my living room now, drinking some coffee with my dressing gown on because it's cold. And I'm going to talk you through the books that I've read so far for this video. So before the nominees were announced, I'd already read Winter's Orbit, The Push and The Gilded Ones. And they all came out kind of at the start of the year. So I was still in a really good habit of writing book reviews and like of making sure I figured out my rating fairly quickly and all that. But I also wasn't reading them as critically as I will be reading the other books on this list. So I do know that like I have a note of all the ratings I gave them, and I will have to double check, but I'm pretty sure they're all a 4.5, maybe. I've just checked the ratings, and the Gilded Ones was a 4.25. The Push was a 4.5, and Winter's Orbit was a 4.5. So, like, of those three books, none of them were 5 stars, but then I don't give out a lot of 5 stars. I would say, I think it's around maybe 5% of the books I read are a 5 star. But I do remember really loving The Push and finding it somewhat unputdownable. Generally, I struggle with books that involve motherhood because, I mean, I'm not a parent, so I struggle to connect with things like that, but it felt like it pulled the reader in and made it easy to connect, especially because it was a multi-generational story. Because I'm pretty sure you've got like your protagonist is Blythe and your daughter's Violet, but I think you're also following at least like her mother's story, which gave a really interesting dynamic, and it also kind of talked about the way that like abuse perpetuates itself. And I thought it was really interesting, this idea of like an unreliable narrator and you're not sure whose account you should be believing, because obviously Violet's Violet, Blythe is Blythe, and they have very conflicting accounts of the events. And just overall, I thought it was a brilliant book. The audiobook was fantastic, and I actually got it through NetGalley. So that was a great experience. I remember putting it on whilst playing Animal Crossing, and I'd only got an Animal Crossing like at Christmas. And I think I probably listened to the audiobook near enough in a single sitting just whilst I was playing Animal Crossing. And then we've got Winter's Orbit, which was the first book that I received from Illumicrate. So in some ways, it has a really fun place in my heart because it's the first Illumicrate book I've got. But I think in my mind, it set a really good tone and established like how good the Illumicrate books could be because it's queer. I realised that I quite like the sort of arranged marriage trope. I liked that there was intrigue in it, it had a good slow burn to it. So it just kind of ticked a lot of boxes about what I like. And also, I'm pretty sure it's a standalone, which I do really appreciate. Like, don't get me wrong, like, I love series, especially when it's a book I really love, because then I get more of it. But there's something really nice about knowing that you can read a book and not have to wait or track down or anything, like knowing that it's complete in its own right. So I did really enjoy Winter's Orbit, obviously. And then The Gilded Ones was like a really fantastic book. Obviously, it's a debut. And I think it was a really, really interesting story. Unfortunately, I also found it quite predictable. I'm fairly sure that I predicted pretty much every twist, and also I have a fairly strong feeling that the title of the sequel is somewhat of a spoiler. Like, obviously, like if you read the book. If you haven't read the book, the title of the sequel may not be a spoiler to you, but I think once the elements that are mentioned in the title are brought up in the book, it feels like somewhat of a spoiler. And the title of the next book is on the like back matter. So if you're looking at the back of the book just to see how many pages long it is, you see the back matter, you see what the next book is. It gives things away. But I didn't think it was a bad book, and you know, I love badass female characters. But as I say, these three books I read, I mean, maybe 10 months ago. So, and obviously I wasn't reading them with the same critical lens that I'm reading the rest of the books on this list, because I didn't know, like I had no idea that I'd even be on BookTube at that point, let alone that I would be doing this video, that I'd be trying to read all the books in this category, all that kind of thing. And since then, so since the nominees were announced, I have read, or I listened to the audiobook for The Lost Apothecary. I started The Spanish Love Deception, but I will be DNFing that. I've been listening to the love songs of W. Du Bois, and I've started Detransition Baby. So that's 4 more books on the list. Spanish Love Deception, I have some very strong feelings about. It generally comes across as like the dynamic is horrible to the point that it almost had me in tears. It's that horrible a dynamic between the characters. It feels quite clear that one of the characters really likes the other one, and it comes across as willful ignorance. It's incredibly slow. Like I got to 150 pages in and like it feels like nothing's really happened. And then I had a look at reviews, and apparently like mildest of spoilers, but like the characters don't even get together until like the 400 page mark, which like I like a slow burn, but it doesn't feel like it's going to be a slow burn. It feels like it's going to be willful ignorance. But what I will say is that there is a possibility I will pick this book back up. The two circumstances where I pick it up are, one, it gets shortlisted, which I think is a high probability, or two, I make it through the other 18 books on the list. With 16 books to get through, and also like life's too short to be reading books that you don't adore, it's difficult for me because I feel like I can't critically analyze a book if I haven't read it in its completion. But at the same time, a DNF is still a form of review. And this isn't like my standard, oh, I'm like temporarily DNFing it because I've got other things going on. This is me, like I'm actively not enjoying this book and do not want to be reading it. The Lost Apothecary, the fact that I listened to it plays a part in it, because I think there's a separate narrator for each of the 3 POVs, and the POV for the American character, which I want to say her name's Caroline, is a British woman, which makes absolutely no sense and is actually really jarring, because the POV is written in first person, but the narrator only adopts an American accent during dialogue. So you've got this American character that's saying, I did this, I did that, but she has a British accent. It was really jarring and a very strange choice. I don't know if it's because it was recorded in a physical studio in the UK and they weren't able to get an American voice actor. I don't know, but it didn't work for me in that aspect. In terms of the story itself, and like spoiler warning for this one, but essentially it all boiled down to a miscommunication trope. And it is one of my most hated tropes. And that is largely because if your whole story can be resolved by two or more characters just having a conversation, then I don't think your story is very good. Essentially. But really, all of the events of the story revolve around the fact that a 12-year-old girl doesn't know that she's having her period. And if any of the adults in the situation explained to her what menstruation was, the whole plot would have been completely changed. I also there seemed to be a twist at the end that I thought, oh, really cool, different, did not see it come. And then there was a further twist that essentially reversed it. I didn't really like aside from the fact that the narrator for Caroline's POV wasn't she was a fine narrator, but it didn't work for me because it should have been an American narrator. I just didn't like Caroline's POV at all. It didn't add anything to the story for me. Yeah, it wasn't my cup of tea. I will probably get back to you later with more thoughts, but that is my thoughts for the moment. I've just finished the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, and right now this is my favourite to win the category of debut novel. It's so good. It feels like it combines black joy and black pain so beautifully together. I love how kind of it spans through the family history. I mean, there's just so much that I absolutely adore about it. I'm just going to double check my notes though. Generally, it's one of those books where you kind of just enjoy the journey, and it's very much like literary fiction in that it is just kind of like exploring these characters' lives. But it's such a beautiful book. I genuinely struggle when I love books this much. So I think I'm struggling to put my finger on just why I loved it. I think it was a really beautiful, poetic book. I loved that it basically gave a family history spanning something like 400 years. But even though the familial relations are quite complex, it's very easy to understand. There were some really shocking and heartbreaking moments, but there were also some really beautiful moments. I loved that it felt very intersectional. And I just think this is an absolutely amazing book. And so far, I think this is maybe the 7th book I've read in the category. I'm not sure, it might only be the 6th. Let's see. So I started off this video having read 3 of them. I've read The Lost Apothecary. I'm probably gonna say that I've DNF'd The Spanish Love Deception, so we'll say I've read that, which I think means this is the 6th one I've read. So I've still got another 13 to read because I don't think I'm going to be able to get my hands on all her little secrets. But I think it's going to be difficult for a book to beat out this one. But at the same time, like, realistically, I think it's unlikely that this book is going to win because it's 800 pages. And the number of people that I've heard say, I've heard this is really good, I've heard people are really enjoying it, but it's thick. And I'm like, yes, it is, but it's worth it. Like, people have read and loved A Little Life. And it's, like, they're very, very different stories. Like, I only compare them because their lengths are comparable. I think A Little Life may be 50, 100 pages shorter than the love songs of W.B. Du Bois. But like the audiobooks, I think A Little Life's actually longer in terms of audiobook length. But in my mind, like, both books are very like beautiful, valuable stories. And like they both span. So I guess there are comparisons, but also like they tell very different stories. And I do hope this wins. And even if it doesn't win, the exposure of being on this list is a good thing, because honestly, I'm not sure if I would have picked up this book had it not been on the list. Because I think the thing is, like, I love long standalone books. In fact, like, I enjoy long books that are part of a series, but like I've got a real soft spot for a standalone. But yeah, I do actually love big books, but they intimidate me, so I don't pick them up. So I probably would have gone, oh, it's 800 pages, it's a 30-hour audiobook. Can't do that. But actually, I'm so glad I did pick it up, and I hope there are other readers like myself that even if they don't pick it up before the voting closes, the fact that it's been on this list encourages them to pick it up. And I'm going to stop now because I'm just singing its praises. And I have 13 books to read still. So I'm about 12 pages into Open Water, and so far I'm absolutely adoring it. It's like so beautiful and so poignant 12 pages in, which is incredible. What I will say though is the fact it's written in second person is really throwing me, especially because despite being written in second person, it feels like it's in first person. It's really odd. So basically, like, it feels like it's from the point of view of the male character. I can't remember his name, if I knew it. Oh no, I didn't know his name. Or at least, if it's been brought up in the last 12 minutes, I haven't picked up on it. So it's from the point of view of the male character, but also it's written in second person, which I feel like you don't get many second person books. And if you do, they tend to be like addressing someone outside the narrative. So that's quite interesting. But in some ways, it's kind of drawing the reader in further because you're one of the characters in the story. I just thought I'd do a quick check-in of like how this is going so far. It's currently Sunday, the 21st of November, so I think I've got 8 days. I'm not sure about time zones and whatnot, but I think the shortlist comes out on the 29th. So as of right now, I have read 5 of the titles. There's one title I cannot read. However, I will say that if the shortlist is announced and I've read the other 9, I will try and get
my hands on a copy, but I don't know if I'll be able to legally get a copy in time, and I'm not prepared to get it illegally for obvious reasons. I'm currently reading 2 of the books, so that's Open Water and Detransition Baby. I have DNF'd one of those books, but I may pick it up. I think I talked about it earlier in the video, so obviously, like, I do plan on just keeping it DNF'd, but I'm also potentially will pick it up again. I have 7 books on my physical TBR. One of them is anticipated to arrive on the 30th, so that could be fun. And then I've got an audiobook TBR of 4, which, considering I work 4 nights and all of the audiobooks are shorter than 15 hours, I will be able to get through this week. So I'm hoping that before my work week begins, I can read Open Water, which I'm about 30 pages in, and it's 160 pages total. I'd also like to read Of Women in Salt, which is a little over 200 pages. I think it's about 205. And then my plan is to read one of the physical books and try and have that finished by the weekend, although that may be pushing it. I was planning on reading She Who Became the Sun, because I think that's got a really high chance of making it to the top 10, and obviously the more top 10 I read this week, the fewer I have to read after it's announced. However, Honey Girl is the only one of, well, Honey Girl and We Are the Brennans are the only longer titles that I'm not able to get an audiobook of. So in my mind anyway, it makes sense to focus on the ones that I can't get an audiobook of. Because if I have to pay like £6, £8, whatever, to get credit to read like The Prophets or She Who Became the Sun or The Sweetness of Water, like, I'm okay with that. Because I would really like to at least read all of the top 10. But if I can read 19 of the 20, I'll also be happy. I'm still reading Open Water. It's like slow progress, but I think it's more the reading mood that I've been in lately than the book itself. But I will say that I'm almost 50 pages in, I think, and I actually don't know the characters' names, which I probably wouldn't have actually noticed were it not for the fact that, like, I'm talking about this book, critiquing it, etc. But I think it's clearly a deliberate choice, and it's a really interesting, clever choice, combining it with the fact that it's written in second person. So your narrator is referring to themselves as you, and the fact that you don't know the characters' names makes it very much like you are very much part of the narrative. And it's really smart. And also this book is ridiculously beautiful in its writing. Like, it talks about grief in a very kind of honest and open way. So the writing's absolutely gorgeous, and I'm not sure if I can do it justice by reading it out, but I will read a passage. She reaches for your hand and you take it. Fitting together like this isn't every day. She's wearing rings on her 4 ring fingers, the bands cool between your own. Neither of you dare to look at one another as you hold this heavy moment in your hands. You're light-headed and warm. You're both silent. You're both wondering what it could mean that desire could manifest in this way. So loud for such a tender touch. Okay, so I'm going to preface this clip with a trigger warning for discussion of racism and police brutality, and I will pop a thing on the screen, so if you don't want to hear about that, skip this section until it's no longer on the screen. So I'm still reading Open Water, and it's such a beautiful book, and it's so hard-hitting as well. So it's a story of love, but it's also a story of being Black in Britain. And like, obviously not an experience I know anything about. Despite what the government in the UK might say, 100% I know there's still an issue of racism and institutionalised racism in Britain. And I've just gotten to a passage in Open Water where the narrator is talking about a piece where he discusses, a lot of the book is him discussing police brutality and the idea that he's not really seen by the police. And he's also talking about how, he doesn't know if when he's walking alone at night, if he'll make it home, and if he doesn't make it home, if it'll be at the hands of someone that looks like him or someone that doesn't see him. I'm just going to check to make sure I've worded that correctly. Yeah. The one that looked like him or the one that doesn't see him. And that was, it's a recurring theme. A lot of what this book does is it has these recurring themes and things that come up again. And it even uses the same phrasing to kind of bring home that is recurring the theme. But then it's just gotten to this passage, and I'll just read it out. Policemen give each other a warning, like in this video, whereby on seeing an object in a young Black man's hand, one of the pair screams to the other, "Gun, gun, gun," before they unload 20 shots in all, 4 connecting with a body that is no longer his own. Perhaps never was, after all. It's not a sudden loss of rights that enables a pair of men to destroy another's body on suspicion. No, it's not sudden. The perception of a young Black male existed long before this moment, before he fit a description, before 2 policemen and a helicopter deemed him to be the person smashing the windows of cars, despite not having proof, despite only being told someone in the area was smashing the windows of cars. No, it's not sudden. This moment has been building for years, many years longer than any of these men have been alive. This moment is older than all of us. It's longer than the 147 clip, which shows me a murder. I've just had to kind of stop because one, that is a heartbreaking and obviously very raw, honest, truthful passage. It was a combination of that passage having such punch and also the fact that there are people in the UK, and I want to say probably a large number of people, who walk through life thinking that racism isn't a problem anymore. And it makes me so mad to think that that is the case. And obviously, I have the luxury of just being mad. This book is one hell of a book though. So I finished Open Water and I liked it. I would say it's a 4.75, but that's largely because the ending didn't feel like it gave me enough of a closure on the character stories. Because it's such a poetic and thoughtful novel, I kind of needed something a little more explicit with the ending. It was incredibly beautiful, and I'm so glad that I've read it, and I think a lot of people will enjoy it because it has such a realistic feel of the way that joy and pain intersperse in life. But I would rank it just below the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. But I definitely would recommend it. So it's currently the very early hours of Tuesday morning. And ideally, I'd like to finish Of Women and Salt tonight, which could be a bit tricky because it is 200 pages. So I'm thinking that's going to take me maybe about 6 hours to read. And then I would like to read Honey Girl by Saturday. And if I manage to do that, I'll have 4 more physical books to read, which is probably still going to be pushing it, but the shortlist comes out next week. I think it's next Thursday, possibly. I don't know. It's a little tricky because time zones and whatever. But I do know that it gets shortlisted next week, so the 4 books may not actually be 4 that I have to read, if that makes sense. And I also have 3, 4. No, I also have 4 audiobooks to listen to this week. So everything going to plan, by Saturday morning, I should only have... Oh no. I should only have 4 physical books left to read. But also, I just realised that I forgot about ebooks, so I've got 2 of those as well. But I think 13 out of 20 would be pretty decent if I can get to that point. So it's nearly 4:30 in the morning, and I'm having a really hard time getting into Of Women and Salt. And I'm only about 13 pages in, so I think it's too early to really say whether it's the book or the genre, but I think I'm going to give it till page 50, and then if I'm still not loving it, I will put it to one side and pick up something else. Because I think 25% of the way through is giving it a fair shot to see if it's something I'm going to enjoy right now. I will say that it's reading very literary fiction, which I think we've established by now. I don't mind a bit of literary fiction, but I think I've been reading / listening to a lot of lit fic recently. I think a lot of the books in this category are lit fic actually, and I think I just need something a little bit different. And this book may not be it, but I guess we'll see. I think I'll check back in when I reach the 50-page mark, or it may be later if I find out I'm actually really enjoying it. So I decided to just read up to page 48 because that's a new chapter and it makes sense to stop at the chapter point. And so far my feelings about Of Women and Salt is that it feels really disjointed. I get the impression that it will all come together towards the end, but so far there's been what was kind of like a prologue, and then there's been 2 chapters, and you're following a different perspective in each chapter. They're all related, but the only reason I know they're related is because there's a family tree at the start of the book. And I've got this weird thing about, I don't really like family trees in books because I end up just repeatedly flicking back to them. And, honestly, you probably, shouldn't need a family tree to understand it. But, I mean, that's beside the point. I just think it's really difficult because I'm now basically a quarter of the way through the book. And I don't really know what it's about. Obviously, I think I'm gonna, keep trying with it. But I also think I'm gonna pick up another book to read alongside it so I can kind of switch between them, and hopefully that'll like push me to keep going.
So I listened to The Firekeeper's Daughter last night whilst I was at work, and I kind of feel like I'm not sure how I feel about it, and I just think I need to kind of talk through my thoughts and feelings. So the first thing I want to say is this book comes with major spoiler warnings. So you've got like spoiler warnings for drugs, murder, sexual assault, victim blaming, discussions of blood quorum. I think if you're someone who has any kind of triggers, definitely look up the content warnings for this book, because obviously right now I'm struggling to think of what all of the potential triggers in this book are, but it is very much like it touches on some really difficult topics. And that's not to say that this isn't an important and like beautiful, brilliant book, just that it may not be for everyone because it is so challenging at times. I think when I initially picked up this book, so first things first, I didn't realise this book was contemporary. Like, I knew before I picked it up, but it's only really in the last like week, I think. Like, since I've looked up the nominees for the debut novel category of the Goodreads Choice Award, that I found out that this book is contemporary, and this is something that I feel like a lot of people thought, because the cover, I will pop it on screen, the cover very much looks like a fantasy novel cover. And knowing that this book focuses on a Anishinaabe protagonist, it makes sense why the cover looks the way it does. But I also think that it puts forward the wrong kind of impression of what this book is about. Like, yeah, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. I mean, we do, rightly or wrongly, people do judge books by their cover. But I think a cover should give you an impression of what the book's about, whereas this cover very much doesn't. As for the content of the book, when I first started reading it, it was very much like YA contemporary, which is what this book is, but that's not a genre I read much of. Like, well, I say that, I don't think I pick up much YA contemporary, and when I do, it has to reach a higher bar for me to like get some real enjoyment out of it. And that's not a snub on the genre, that's on my reading tastes. So for a chunk of the start of it, I wasn't quite vibing with it. And that was to say, like, it was fine. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't blowing me away. And then in the latter half of the book, as it got a little bit deeper into all these challenges and stuff, it just blew me away. And then I think the turning point was a really powerful moment where like all of the elders of the community gathered around this character, and I am just an absolute sucker for these kind of like powerful, poignant, like everyone rallying towards someone, or just the big impact moments. And then there was just lots of moments that really took me by surprise. And I think this is a book that isn't easily rated or even honestly discussed. Like, the blurb gives you just the right amount of information. It basically centers around an 18-year-old girl whose mother had her when she was 16. So her parents decided that they weren't going to put her father on her birth certificate, and that meant that she wasn't able to be enrolled in her tribe. And she somewhat lives between the world of like her very privileged non-indigenous family and the world of her tribe. So she kind of feels like she doesn't belong to either, but she also has knowledge of traditional medicines and that kind of thing. And when she is witness to a crime, she gets pulled into an investigation with the FBI and Bureau of Tribal Affairs, I think it's called. Like it's a joint investigation, and they ask her to use her knowledge of traditional medicine as well as her science background to help them solve this crime. But there's so much more to the plot, and this is a book that touches on kind of all of the things that people within like indigenous communities could be struggling with. And overall, it was just an absolutely beautiful book. I think my thoughts on this book are, it probably, like, for me, it wasn't a 5-star read. Like, I love it and I definitely want a copy to go back to, and I can imagine like loving it the next time I read it as well. But I think it's either a 4.5 or a 4.75 with me, for me, which is an incredibly high rating regardless. So I definitely don't think it is better than the love songs of W.B. Du Bois, but also this is an exceptional book. And I think it's going to be one of these where it's like you're really splitting hairs between the books that are in this category, because so far so far of the books that I've read in this category, I really think The Lost Apothecary is the only one that I didn't think was exceptional. Like, I loved Open Water, I loved The Push, I loved The Gilded Ones, I loved Winter's Aura, I loved the love songs of W.B. Du Bois. So it's gonna be interesting to see what books make the top 10. And I definitely think that if Firekeeper's Daughter ends up winning this category, as I predict it will be well deserved. I think honestly, like as I've just said, like the only book that I didn't think was worthy of winning this category so far is The Lost Apothecary. Do I think it could still win? Maybe. It's got a beautiful cover. I think people are going to recognise the title. It's been read by a lot of people. But it just wasn't very strong for me. So, on to what I am currently reading. At the moment, I am physically reading Honey Girl. I have Detransition Baby on my Kindle, and I haven't read any more of Women and Salt. And then tonight I will listen to one of the 3 audiobooks that I have left, but I haven't decided which. I might put a poll on Instagram and let Instagram decide. That could be fun. Honey Girl, I may be like 30 pages in, but I don't have a good grasp on the story yet.
Well, I'm annoyed because my bus just drove on right past me without even a sideways glance at my bus stop. So I've got about 20 minutes to wait in the cold. So I figure I'll tell you how I got on with the book I was reading last night. So last night, per poll I put up on Instagram, I read the final revival of Oakland Nev by, I think it's Donnie Walton, and it was exceptional. It was a 5-star. It's been compared to Daisy Jones and the Six, but what I would say is there's like a mid-story twist that just completely like blows Daisy Jones and the Six out of the water. It's a really awesome story that sucks you in and gets you rooting for all of the characters. And quite frankly, I could see this book winning the debut novel category. And I don't think it was quite... I don't think it was quite as good as the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, but I do think it is equally as worthy of winning. I think as a book it's kind of genre defying, because whilst it is historical fiction, it also has a kind of mystery thriller element, as your narrator she establishes right at the start of the story that her father died like 50 years ago as a result of something that Oakland Nev did, but you're working towards finding out what actually happened, and then there is a little bit of like he said, she said conjecture around it, which I thought was really interesting. And I thought the whole book worked towards a really satisfying and cohesive ending. I'm popping in super quick because in Honey Girl, one of her friends, she met because her other friend was like caring for her on a psychiatric ward, and it just feels really like uncomfortable. And apparently patient confidentiality is not a thing in the world of Honey Girl, and it's played off as this person who actually like needs help with their mental health being like quirky, and it's like, no, please get the support you need. So there's a red weather warning in place for my local area, which means that work is not happening tonight. And I'm not really sure what my plan for the evening is. I think I'd like to try and finish Honey Girl tonight. I don't know if that's possible, but I guess we'll see. Plenty of reading to get done, and hopefully my lights don't go out. So first I should probably say sorry for not kind of updating more. The books I've been reading recently I've just kind of felt very meh about. I will try and put together some actual thoughts about the books, but right now I'm focusing on Honey Girl and I'd really like to finish it today. I don't know if that is actually gonna happen, but mild spoilers for Honey Girl, so like click away, but it won't be anything too major, I would say. I'm finding it kind of heavy going at the moment. It very much feels like a debut novel. I don't know, like, you know when you read a book and you're like, okay, yeah, clearly this is this author's first book. And you can see that they will improve over time, but their debut novel isn't showcasing the best of what they can do. And I think this book very much is about mental health. It just feels very blunt, and there's elements of it where like the mental health rep feels really questionable. And for me, like, your protagonist of Grace very obviously seems like someone that needs help with her mental health. And the way it's portrayed, I'm kind of shocked that she wasn't getting help. Like, I get it, but also it feels like she'd already recognised that her mental health was an issue. I don't know. It's a really, really hard book for me, especially because I don't know if it's a flaw in the marketing or a flaw in the perception, but like, I knew going in it wasn't a romance, but I feel like it was originally billed as a romance, and it 100% isn't. It's about someone in their late 20s. Like, it's basically the story of a lost millennial, and that feeling of like, what are you doing with your life? You're almost 30, your mental health's pretty shaky, so I don't know. It's a very middle of the road book for me, but also it's got some bits that I just find really questionable. So yesterday I finished my 10th book of this list, and I know I'm going to have to go through the fudge and figure out which books I still need to give my thoughts on. But since we're officially at the midway point, I thought I would do a bit of a ranking of where I think the books currently sit in my mind at the moment. Also, the first round of voting ends in about 4 hours, so we'll see which books made the top 10. The top book on my list so far is The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. I absolutely adored it, and it's the book that has got my vote in the first round of voting. I don't think it's going to make the top 10. I'd love to see it make the top 10, but I want to say it had like the second least ratings. Let me double check. Yeah, in terms of overall ratings, it had like less than 3,000 ratings, which makes me think that as excellent a book it is, I don't think it's going to make it to the next round. And also, it is a chunky book. I believe the physical copy is like 800 pages. It's well worth the read, and definitely, like, so far it's been my favourite book, and I think it's going to be hard for anything to beat it out. The book that's like position 2 in my current ranking is the final revival of Opal and Nev. I really enjoyed it. I don't think I expected to enjoy it quite as much as I did, but it's absolutely fantastic, and I found it gripping basically from start to end. In third place, I've got The Firekeeper's Daughter, which I did think was an excellent story, but it didn't pull me in straight away. Now, I don't know if knowing where the story's going, on reread, I will love it more. It is one of the books that I do plan on getting a copy of so I can reread it because I absolutely adored it. And just below The Firekeeper's Daughter was Open Water. In current 5th place is Winter's Orbit, which I really, really enjoyed. And I think it's probably got a broader appeal than some of the other titles on this list. But I also don't know, because this is a very literary heavy category, so I don't know if that's going to go against the books that are not so literary. But I did very much enjoy it. And just below Winter's Orbit, we've got The Push, which was an absolutely excellent book. Then we've got The Gilded Ones, which I think, as far as debuts go, it was a really good debut. And like absolutely solid. And all of those books that I've mentioned are a 4.25 or higher in terms of rating. And then I've got a bit of a gap, and the next books are significantly lower rated. So we've got The Lost Apothecary, which I rated a 3.25, and I think I just generally had a lot of issues with it. But I do think it's possibly one of the books in this category where you can tell it's a debut author, and likely their work will get better and better with every subsequent novel they release. And then the final two places are Black Book and The Paper Palace. Now, I've given The Paper Palace a 2, but I've possibly been a bit generous with that. I didn't connect with it at all. So that is the 10 books that I've read so far. I am currently reading Detransition Baby, which I reckon will probably sit somewhere between The Gilded Ones and The Lost Apothecary. And I'm also reading Honey Girl. I've got about another 100 pages of that, and I'm thinking it's probably going to end up around a 3, which would put it slightly below The Lost Apothecary. Hey, editing me. I was just in the process of obviously editing this video, and I realised that I never spoke about Black Book or The Paper Palace, which is obviously a massive oversight on my part. Paper Palace, I really don't get. It seemed to be a story about a woman that decided to sleep with a man who wasn't her husband, and then reflected on the past. There didn't feel like there was much substance to it, and I just ended up not caring. There was stuff that happened, there was murder, there was assault, which obviously are things that you should care about, but the protagonist was so bland and dull, and the book didn't feel like it had any point to it. I think it just left no real impression on me beyond it being dull. As for Black Book, I think the concept was really interesting. I just think the execution lacked a certain something. So it's basically about this black man who essentially gets headhunted at his job working at Starbucks because on a whim he decides to upsell a corporate client a different coffee, and they're so impressed with his sales tactic that they go, hey, come work for us. And then it's a lot of frat boy culture and them being really racist to him, and it was a really uncomfortable read. It was just such a frat boy corporate culture book, which I get is the point. It's meant to be criticising it, so everything's amped up. And I think it's meant to be funny, but I just did not enjoy it. It's also a book that is way, way, way over blurbed. I think the blurb mentions something that happens at 50%, and then there's another thing that happens at 3/4 of the way through the book. Yeah, so I can't remember how long the book is, but I said that the tragedy mentioned in the blurb happens at the midway point, and the change that's also mentioned in the blurb happens at 7.5 hours in. Another thing I didn't like about it is there's a mention of like loads of different religions, and like the whole frat culture of The Office is meant to be based on like using the tenets of a variety of different religions. And now that I think about it, I don't know if this is deliberate, but like they literally only refer to like biblical stuff. They never refer to like anything other than Christian faith, which, like I say, now that I think about it, I imagine that was actually probably a deliberate thing. But as I was listening to it, it just really annoyed me because I was like, you've got all these different mentions of other faiths, and yet you're only talking about one. What I will say is I really I thought it was interesting that it broke the fourth wall, and a lot of the time the narrator is speaking directly to the reader. I just don't think this book was my cup of tea at all. And by the end of it, I was just unfortunately glad for it to be over. And yet I still liked it more than The Paper Palace, which says a lot about how much I dislike The Paper Palace. It's a little bit after 2 a.m. on the 30th of November, which means that I think the top 10 nominees for the Goodreads Choice Awards should be live. So I'm just going to pop in a screen recording and I will react to the top 10 in the debut novel category, and also have a look and see if there's any surprises in the other categories. Okay, so I've got it open and I'll just need to refresh because I've had it open for a few minutes, so it hadn't updated last time. Final round begins in 4 minutes. Let's see what we've got. Okay, final round. Let's go straight to the debut novel category, and then we will have a look at the other categories. Why can't I see it immediately? It's going to be really obvious. Okay, so debut novel. So we have The Paper Palace, which I'm a little surprised because I didn't enjoy that one. The Lost Apothecary, which I guess I'm not surprised since it is so widely read, but it's not one of my favourites. Firekeeper's Daughter, which I think is going to win this category. Or at least that's my prediction, but we'll see. She Who Became the Sun. So another YA. The Spanish Love Deception. The Push. Honey Girl. Detransition Baby. We Are the Brennans, and The Gilded Ones. Okay, so of these, I've read The Paper Palace. I did not enjoy it. It's like my least favourite of the ones I've read. I've read The Lost Apothecary. Enjoyed it more than The Paper Palace, but also not a great amount. Firekeeper's Daughter I did love, and of the ones that are still in the running, it is my top pick so far. I haven't read She Who Became the Sun yet, but that has potential. Spanish Love Deception at present is a DNF, but since it has made it to the top 10, I may pick it up again. The Push I really enjoyed. I think it would be a fantastic win. There's other books that I think I would prefer to win, but I wouldn't be mad if The Push won. Honey Girl, not a fan. Detransition Baby I'm currently reading. It's very lit thick, but it's not a bad story, and it's definitely got a lot more nuance than I expected. We Are the Brennans, I've no idea. Hopefully my copy arrives before voting closes. I think my copy is due to arrive
today. And the Gilded Ones, I've read it. I loved what I've read of it so far. So also wouldn't be mad if it won. So based on my predictions last time, I said that I thought the winner of this category would be YA. And we've got 3 YA books in the running at present. So we've got The Firekeeper's Daughter, She Who Became the Sun, and The Gilded Ones. But I'll have to have a look at all the numbers in a bit more detail to see who I think might actually win. I will say with the debut novel category, I'm really sad that my 2 5-stars from that category haven't made it to this round. I'm not surprised that The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois didn't make it, because like I loved it, but also it had so few ratings. But I am surprised that the final revival of Oprah Nev didn't make it. In terms of the other categories, I can't immediately see any that are obviously been snubbed or missing, but I am excited to see that Iron Widow has made it to the finalist round of YA fantasy and science fiction. I would love to see that book win. Whether it will, considering it's going against Holly Black and Leigh Bardugo and all the like big names, but that would be amazing. I'm also happy to see that Amari has made it to the final round in middle grade, and in non-fiction I'm happy to see that Cultish and Mediocre are both on that list. But I think it'll be exciting to see what I think of the debut novels that I still haven't read. I've just had a quick look at my projections chart, and I will say that I didn't quite guess who the final 10 would be, but I did guess but 7 of the 10 that I predicted in like my stats being the top 10 are in the top 10. So it's just Honey Girl, The Paper Palace, and We Are the Brennans that I put lower down. I think The Paper Palace is the biggest surprise for me, because like I vaguely recognised the UK cover when I saw it. I will pop it on screen, but I feel like I haven't heard anything about it. But then I don't feel like I'm particularly in litfic circles, and I would even go as far as say that, and I will never not say this because I hate this as a genre classification, but I would even go as far as to say it's women's fiction, which like isn't something I gravitate towards. So at this point I haven't actually decided if I'm going to stick to just reading the top 10, like considering the progress I've made in terms of reading all of the 20. But I did have the audiobook of The Sweetness of Water, and like obviously Audible restricts how many returns you can do in a period of time and stuff, so I wouldn't have been able to return it anyway. So I figured I'd listen to that last night, and I'm actually mildly surprised at how much I enjoyed it. It had a plot, but it was quite minimal. It was a lot more about all the different characters that were involved. It was set during, I think it's like literally just after the Civil War in America, and there's still like, I think it's set in the South, and there's racial tensions, like it's a little bit queer as well. I think there's some of the nuance that I missed listening to it, I think because I struggled to initially get into it because it is very much like lit fic rather than genre fic, and I think sometimes that can be
a lot more of a mindset and about really experiencing it as opposed to like world building, because I think I struggle, like I'm not sure if I'm particularly bothered about whether a book is plot focused or character focused, but I do think it takes me a little bit more like mental energy to follow along with a book that is character focused. Although that said, like the Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois was very character focused, but also it's a much longer book, so you've got a lot more time to explore these characters. So anyway, I do think I missed like some of the nuance, some of the plot points in The Sweetness of Water, but overall I found it very enjoyable, like the whole journey and this story. And I felt transported, and I almost felt like I was part of the story. My main critique of it was that the ending, like, I wasn't bothered with the way the book actually ended as such, but I did feel like the last few chapters, each chapter felt like it would have been a good stopping off point, and then you had another chapter. And I think there was a point where the story could have ended and it would have given the same level of satisfaction and conclusion to the story. I do think this is the kind of book that is likely more going to appeal to people that enjoy historical fiction and who enjoy lit fic. But I also think as far as those two go, it's on the easier end of the spectrum. And as I say, the audiobook was absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed it, and it very much transported me into the story. At the moment, I am focusing on trying to finish Detransition Baby. I'm about halfway through, and overall I'm enjoying it. It has like, it's a lot more of a complex story than I initially thought, and it does delve, I suppose the name should be a giveaway, but it does delve into a little bit more about like detransition and basically like this particular character's experience with detransitioning and the reality for their life living as a trans woman, but also living their life after detransitioning, but also still not feeling quite comfortable in their gender. I think my primary criticism of the book so far has been that I'm not sure if it's purple prose or if it's just that is being very literary. But there are moments where I go, you didn't need to be this pretentious. I will try and remember to put some quotes in later, but there are a few passages that make good points, but they make them in a very highbrow manner. But overall, the story's fantastic and the characters are really intricate. So you've got a fantastic balance of plot and character. And I wish the chapters were shorter, because I think there's only about 8, 9, 10 chapters. So I've managed to finish another 2 of the titles that are on the top 10. So I've finished She Who Became the Sun, which I actually listened to that as an audiobook, and I also finished reading Detransition Baby. It's currently the 4th of December. It's currently the 5th of December, which, because of time zones, the voting doesn't actually close until tomorrow morning. Like, I'm fairly sure I know who I'm going to be voting for in this category now, but I do still need to finish We Are the Brennans. I think it's unlikely that I'm going to go back and read The Spanish Love Deception, but also it feels a little bit like not worth my time because I know I wasn't enjoying it, and I was 150 pages in, which I think is far enough into the book to know that it just wasn't for me. So Detransition Baby actually ended up coming out as a 5-star read. I got to the end and I was just weeping at how kind of beautiful and all the different bases it touched on. I did think that some of the language was a little bit pretentious in places, but it also had some really incredible quotable moments, and it is one of those books that I can see myself reading again and again and again. With regards to She Who Became the Sun, as I mentioned, I actually listened to that. And the audiobook is fair enough. The only thing I will say is that I found it really difficult to keep track of the characters because I think there was a Chu and there was a Chung, and I found them on the audiobook. It was very difficult to like differentiate between the two. So that was quite difficult for me. And then also I really enjoyed when the characters were at the monastery at the start of the story, but that didn't last for very long, and that was kind of one of my favourite parts of the story. So that was a little bit disappointing that that wasn't fleshed out a little bit more. I wasn't a big fan of the kind of battles and like military strategy aspect of the story. I was a lot more interested in Chu's individual journey. So I kind of felt like I went in peaks and troughs with the story, that I'd be enjoying it for large portions of time and then it'd be like a battle or military strategy and I just wouldn't be enjoying it as much. Like, I still think it ranks highly up there. It just wasn't like my favourite book. So if we ignore the Spanish Love Deception, the only book that I still have to read out of the top 10 is We Are the Brennans, and I'm currently about 70 pages in, so I've got about 210 pages to read, ideally before the end of today, which I want to say is probably fairly doable. I don't know. I think if I focus, it should be. It feels like it's reading quite quickly. Not adoring it so far, and one of the things that's really annoying me is that every chapter starts with kind of a repeat of the previous chapter. Like, it won't be necessarily the last line, but it'll be like from the last paragraph, it'll repeat a line that was in the previous chapter, and it's just like, it felt novel and cool the first couple of times, but it's happening every chapter and I'm not enjoying it. So far the book's not blowing me away. Like, I'm intrigued enough to keep reading, but I'm not absolutely in awe of it. It's almost the end of Sunday and I still haven't finished We Are the Brennans. I honestly don't know if this book is just reading slow or it's just not like making me want to binge it, because it should have been doable for me to read a book that's like less than 200 pages in a couple of days, considering I've not really done much this weekend. Like, I'm enjoying it. I'm finding it pretty like intriguing. It's not gonna be a new favourite, but also I could imagine rereading it in the future. I don't know. I finished We Are the Brennans. And with that, I'm going to say that this kind of challenge to read the Goodreads Choice nominees is over. I didn't quite get to all 20 of the books that made the long list, and obviously one of the top 10 was a DNF for me, but I'm fairly happy with what I did manage to achieve. And I feel like I can make a really informed decision about what book I'm going to vote for in this category, having read the majority of the books that have been nominated, and obviously having at least attempted all 10 of the books that made the shortlist. We Are the Brennans was very much a middle of the road book for me. I probably will return to it at some point in the future, but it was one of those books that didn't hold that many surprises, and it was a lot more about the journey. I also felt like the ending was a little bit too kind of happy ending and not realistic. I don't know. It felt like an interesting direction to take given the tone of the book. But I would say it's probably like around a 3.5 as a rating, so I think that puts it very squarely in the middle of the pack for the books. And I'm just going to have a look and bring up like some quick stats and obviously do a rundown of how I would rank all of these books. Of the 20 titles that won the Goodreads nominee list for the category of debut novel, I have read and completed 15 of them, and I also have one hard DNF and one soft DNF. And then the other 3 titles are ones that I am interested in, but sadly wasn't able to get to before voting closed, basically. They also didn't make the shortlist, but they are titles that I'd be interested in picking up in the future. So the hard DNF was The Spanish Love Deception. It just didn't work for me at all. I found the way that the 2 characters just didn't communicate really grating. I found that one of the characters, whilst it felt like they were trying to tell the reader that this character was head over heels, they also came across as really mean, and I just was not enjoying it. I'm sure I know there are plenty of people that really enjoyed this book, but it just wasn't for me. And then the soft DNF was Of Women and Salt. I got about a quarter of the way through and I just generally had quite a hard time with it. I know literary fiction can take a while to get into. I felt it was really disjointed, having each narrative being from a different POV, and the only reason I knew that they were connected was that there was a very rough family tree at the start of the book. So I wasn't enjoying it, and the reason it's a soft DNF is that obviously it didn't make it to the shortlist, and I'm just not interested in continuing it right now, but I would potentially pick it up in the future. So with regards to how I would rate these books, if I include the hard and the soft DNF, in 17th place we have The Spanish Love Deception, which obviously was a DNF. In 16th place we have Of Women and Salt, which was a soft DNF. And then we have The Paper Palace, which honestly I probably would have DNF'd that if it wasn't on the shortlist. and I was waiting for something to happen that really dragged me into the story, I would place that as 15th, although honestly it may have actually rated lower than the DNFs, and I gave that 2 stars. Then we've got The Black Buck, which I gave 2.5 stars. Honey Girl, which was a 2.75. The Lost Apothecary, which was a 3.25. We Are the Brennans, which was a 3.5. The Sweetness of Water, which was a 3.75. But honestly, like, we're starting to get into books that were actually really top notch, and it's just kind of splitting hairs now. The Gilded Ones was a 4.25. Then we've got Winter's Orbit, which was a 4.5. The Push, which was also a 4.5. She Who Became the Sun, another 4.5. And then we've got Open Water at 4.75. Firekeeper's Daughter at 4.75. Got Detransition Baby, which was a 5. The Final Revival of Opal and Nev, which was a 5. And my favourite book out of all of the ones that I read, which was The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. So I voted for my favourite, which, as you saw, was Detransition Baby. It's obviously not my favourite of the category, but it was the only one that was left in the shortlist. And I guess I'll be back in a couple of days to see who actually won this category. But I'm going to guess it's either going to be The Push or The Lost Apothecary. Although I do think there's an outside chance they might be The Spanish Love Deception or Firekeeper's Daughter. So I guess I'll see you in a couple of days. I'm back and the winners have now been announced. I have got Goodreads open on my laptop, so let's have a look who won debut novel and see if we can see what the number of votes were as well. So, debut. Oh, I was looking. Oh, that's really disappointing. The Spanish Love Deception won debut novel. It had 55,621 votes. The Lost Apothecary came in second with 47,761 votes. And Firekeeper's Daughter came in third with 38,188. So basically, I predicted the top 4, not necessarily in that order, but I did accurately predict who was top 4. Disappointingly enough, my pick out of the top 10 came in 10th. Let's see about my favourite. So my favourite book came in 16th, I think. No. 14th. Is that right? 11, 12, 13, 15th, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Yeah, so The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois came in 15th. And that's interesting. It's very interesting. I noticed that the Your Choice sticker is only on my vote from the first round, not the second round. I'm sure this vlog has been very, very long, so I will say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please give me a like, give me a comment, because obviously this has been 3 weeks of my life, but I've really enjoyed it. Let me know if you'd like me to do a particular category next year, and until next time, bye.
There's a place